Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. So due to the new war in the Middle East that's going on, this war with Iran, I've been thinking a lot about the previous wars in the Middle East that have occurred within my lifetime and ultimately my memory of September 11th, 2001. And that's going to have been 25 years ago this upcoming September. And I was 8 years old on 9/11. I was in second grade. I think I'm definitely part of really the youngest group of people in America that really still have somewhat of an active memory of what went on that day. So I would talk to people who were a year behind me in school, a year younger than me, and they don't always seem to remember it as well as I did. Even people with my own grade don't always seem to remember it as well as I did. I was a year older than most people in my grade, so that may have contributed to me remembering it a little better than most people. But also the fact that I live in New Jersey, I think that definitely hit a lot closer to home than it did to other people around the United States. But there was, I think, 3 people in my town who died 9/11. No one I knew personally, but there's people in my town who died in it, and I was always running into people throughout my life who were in New York City at the time, or who knew someone who was there, or knew someone who died. You're always running into people who have some connection to it in New Jersey. I think my closest connection to someone who was there, a job that I had in high school, my first boss, he worked across the street from the World Trade Center, and he was right there when the towers came down, and he apparently pulled a newspaper stand over top of himself to save himself from debris that was falling down. So that's probably the person I know who was closest to actually witnessing what went on that day. But getting back to my memory of that day, it's definitely shaped through the lens of being 8 years old. I remember that morning in class. It was just a normal day of school. It was early in the school year, so we were still kind of getting into the routine of how the year was going to go. I remember we were doing our morning assignment. There was an assignment on the board we were doing. We were all working on that. My teacher was in the hallway welcoming kids in as they came in the morning. I remember she was huddled with a bunch of other teachers in the hallway. They were all kind of hush-hush talking about something. I remember I recognized that was going on, but I didn't really think too much about it. There was an announcement that came on the intercom, and the principal said, "Attention teachers, please check your email for an important announcement." I remember she bolted over to her computer, checking her email. I don't remember if we asked her what was going on. Someone might have asked what was going on, but I don't think she actually told us what was happening. We kind of just forgot about it. It wasn't something, I don't think we were really old enough to pester her, to ask her more and more about what was going on. We just kind of accepted that it wasn't something she was going to tell us. But all throughout the day, kids were constantly getting called home. I remember it was like one kid would get called home, then 5 minutes later, the phone would ring again. Another kid would have to go to the office to get sent home. It was just this constant kids getting called home throughout the whole day. I remember it was just like, up, so-and-so was going home, up, so-and-so was going home. It was just continuous. I remember at one point we left our classroom to go to art class, and we passed by the main lobby. I remember it was just this lines and lines of kids getting picked up from school. One kid in my class was like, dang, look how many kids are getting sent home. But we didn't really question too much about it. We just kind of accepted that something was going on. Kids were going home. We didn't really know much about it. That was just kind of the way it was. And even during lunch, I remember the cafeteria being very empty. There weren't many kids in the cafeteria. But at that point, we just kind of stopped questioning it. We just kind of were just rolling with it. My parents didn't pick me up from school because they thought it was safer for me to stay at school, because they knew that there would be just pandemonium of people on the road picking up kids, and they thought it was safer for me just to stay at school until things calmed down a little bit, and then just come home as normal. But I remember by the end of the day, when there was just a couple kids left in the class, it would just kind of turn into this free play day. We were just in the back room playing with toys, just kind of enjoying a day of no schoolwork, not really knowing the seriousness of what was going on. But I remember my mom was at the bus stop. When I got off the bus, my mom was there waiting for me. That wasn't always the case. I mean, I lived down the street from the bus stop, but it was unusual for her to meet me there when I got home from school. So that was kind of a sign that something was going on. But I remember she asked me when we were walking, do you know what happened today? Some planes flew into some buildings in New York City and in the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and some plane had crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. Just kind of tell me the facts of what happened. I didn't really think too much about it. It was just kind of, okay, that happened today. But I remember when my dad came home from work and we were at the dinner table, that's when I think we started talking a little more about it. He was kind of explaining to me what happened. That I remember he said that these people intentionally flew these planes into these buildings. They hijacked the planes and flew them in. I remember my mind just kind of was blown by that. I was just like, these people intentionally crashed planes into buildings? I just could not comprehend what had happened. I mean, I understood what happened, but I just couldn't understand that someone would choose to do that. I remember that just kind of blew my mind thinking about that. But the next day in class, I remember people were finally talking about it. The teacher was talking about it to the class. We had a morning meeting to kind of go over what happened, just make sure the kids were, I guess, understanding it and not, too upset by what happened. But I remember I raised my hand and said, they did it on purpose. These people crashed the planes on purpose. It was just like this revelation to me. I just thought like no one else knew that for some reason, and I just needed to share that to the class. And she was like yeah, they did it on purpose. And she kind of explained, that it was a terrorist attack. But I remember one of the kids in our class asked, well, why did they hate Americans? Why do they want to attack us? And I remember she said that they just don't like us because we're free. They don't like freedom, so they hate us. And it's a very simplified answer to give to a kid, but just interesting thinking of her response there. I mean, it's a very complex, a topic. It's you could go into, talk about geopolitics forever of what led to 9/11 happening, why they attacked us. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just kind of talking about my memory of the day. But it's kind of hard, I think, to explain that to a child. How do you tell a child someone hates you for being an American? Someone you don't even know, the other side of the world hates you. I don't think a child can really understand that. I don't think I understood it back then either. Even though I knew the facts of what happened, my mind didn't really comprehend the bigger picture of what it all meant. But I remember after 9/11, there was just flags everywhere. It was American flags everywhere. Every house had an American flag on it. Everyone had the United We Stand bumper stickers on their car. I can't remember a time where I saw more flags. It was just American flags everywhere. I can't really accurately explain how many American flags there were. It was just everywhere. But I remember everything was just very patriotic after that. Everything was just, support our troops, support the victims of 9/11. I remember there was this time, I think it was a month or so after 9/11, every school in America did the Pledge of Allegiance at the same time, or almost every school in America. I remember our school participated, and at a certain time, we all stood up and did the Pledge of Allegiance, and supposedly every school in America did the same thing. So a lot of things like that were going on. I remember we would have things where we would write cards to soldiers who were fighting in Afghanistan. It was just this constant stream of just being patriotic during that time period. But war in the Middle East became so constant of a theme in everyday life that when the Iraq War happened in 2003, it almost just seemed like a continuation of that. It didn't really seem like it was this separate war. In my mind, it just kind of, I think, just blended together as one large conflict in the Middle East. But I remember before the Iraq War, I was in third grade, and our teacher sat us down before, I believe it was the day before the invasion of Iraq began, and they kind of talked to us about what was going on, what was going to happen. I think several students in my school had parents who were going to the Middle East to fight, so they wanted to make sure all the kids were not upset and that they had resources of people to talk to if something happened. So they sat down with us and talked to us about it. I remember one of the kids asked, "Is the war going to be here?" And the teacher said, "Well, no, it's not going to be here." And then someone said, "Well, what if the war was here? What would happen? Would we be safe? If the war happened while we were in school?" I remember the teacher said, "Well, there's enough food in the school here for 2 weeks, so if we needed to stay here, we would be fine here." Not that the war was going to come to the United States and we were going to need to stay in school, but that's just the questions that the kids asked. But I remember that night when I came home, I told my mom about the conversation we had in our classroom about the war in Iraq that was going to begin. I remember telling her, like, yeah, if the war comes here, we get to sleep at school. It'll be like a sleepover party, and there'll be food there, and we get to stay there. My mom was just kind of like, yeah. But I remember a couple of days later, she must have been thinking about that conversation I had with her, and she came up to me and was like, that's not wouldn't be a good thing. If war came here and you had to hide in school, that's not a good thing. I remember I was like, yeah, I know. But just being a kid, being in third grade, I don't think you really see the bigger picture. You just see how things affect you, and you hear, staying at school, sleeping over, it sounds like a fun thing, but if there was a war that someone would have to live through and they were, trapped in school, that would not be a good thing. But it's just interesting just thinking back about how, what I thought about, thinking about the war as a child. But like the war, I think when the war in Afghanistan began, there was American flags everywhere. There's still American flags everywhere during the war in Iraq, but there was these yellow ribbons that were everywhere. There were yellow ribbons around trees, around telephone poles. It was this just flood of yellow ribbons, I remember, in 2003 after the Iraq War began. But like I said before, I think during this time period, and really up until the war ended in 2021 when I was 28 years old. I mean, this was began when I was 8 years old, and then it ended when I was 28. So 20 years of my life, constant war in the Middle East. So the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, as a child, I just kind of thought of it as one big thing. So there was this time where there was kind of this pause of war in the Middle East, at least American involvement after 2021. But when I think about this new war beginning and the war with Iran, it's thinking about what this all means. And I'm just like, all that again? Like, are we done with Middle East yet? It's like, why are we going back there? The majority of my life has been living in a country that's at war in the Middle East. And sometimes I just don't understand why this just keeps happening again and again and again. It's very bizarre. But anyway, I just kind of been thinking about 9/11. I just wanted to share my memory of that day and my memory of that time period. Like I said before, I was 8 years old, so I don't really have a memory of it as far as being understanding what was going on in the whole world, understanding the geopolitics of it. But I was very much aware of the hard facts and the events that occurred during that time. But anyway, that's the video. But be sure to subscribe, and we'll see you next video.